Welcome to Ask Leo Answercast number 146. I'm Leo Notenboom, and I'll be answering questions that people are asking out at AskLeo.com. Today's Answercast is brought to you by me, Leo. If you're a regular listener, you'll know that I often promote my own products here, hoping that you'll find them useful and, in purchasing them, actually help support Ask Leo. And of course, I'm exceptionally grateful when you do so. Another way that you can help that actually doesn't cost you a penny, and honestly really does help Ask Leo, is to share it. Tell a friend about Ask Leo. Encourage them to subscribe to the newsletter. Share Ask Leo links on social media and elsewhere on the web. Trust me, it really does all help. That's AskLeo.com. Thanks. Leo, you've made a big deal about how insecure it is for an internet browser to remember your login information because it can be viewed by anyone using that browser. However, what about websites that offer to remember your login information for you? An example of this is Google. When you're logging in, you can simply check a box that says Stay Signed In, and unless you actually physically log off, you will remain logged in. If you don't check that box, simply closing the browser will log you off. Let's say I'm taking my neighbor's laptop on a business trip for several days. If I stay logged into Google with the Stay Logged In button for the duration of the trip, and I physically log off before I return the laptop, will my neighbor have access to my account information like he would if I had Chrome remember any of my passwords? This is assuming I don't delete any sort of browser information. All I do is log off. The good news is that as long as you remember to log out, you're actually relatively safe. The bad news, besides my having to use the word relatively, is of course when you forget to explicitly log out. Remember Me actually works a little different than having the browser remember your password, but basically it's still the browser that's doing the remembering. When you say Remember Me, the website in question, Google in your example, leaves a cookie on your machine that basically says you're logged in. In fact, that's why after clearing cookies using a tool like CCleaner or the browser itself, you suddenly find you have to log into all your previously remembered websites. Now, there are various techniques that sites use to decide what to put in that cookie that allows them to remember you, and even how long that cookie should last. Cookies can, in fact, persist across browser runs. Cookies can expire after a certain amount of time, or not. And there's no standard about what's actually put inside that cookie, except that it's almost certainly not your login name and password. Usually, it's some kind of a random token that really has meaning only to the service in question. To you and me, it's a random number. To Google, for example, it's a token that says this account is currently logged in. What's important here is that when you sign out, the cookie is either removed or updated to reflect the fact that no one is signed in. So when you return that laptop to its owner, they can't just go into Gmail and, for example, be you. They also can't go spelunking in the cookies or somewhere else to find out the sensitive information like your account ID and password. It's just not there. And you're correct, that is very different than having the browser save passwords for you, because then quite literally the browser saves your account name and password. In a case like this, where you're simply saving your login state, having the Gmail or having the browser remember this cookie, that information is simply not on your computer. So of course, if you forget to log out, then yeah, your friend could go into Gmail and he'd be logged in as you. In fact, I actually see this happen a lot on shared computers. It's risky because, of course, the next person to come along could end up actually hijacking your account, or much worse, I suppose. So, by all means, remember to log out, and by and large, you're relatively safe. Now, I did say relatively, and I need to explain that because, of course, there are no absolutes here. There's more to using a browser than just signing in and visiting pages. You've probably heard of things like the browser cache, which the computer owner could go and examine. Things like HTTPS pages aren't supposed to be cached, and I would assume things like mail websites would rely on that. But to go down the extremely paranoid route, things like the cache and cookies, well, they're just files on your computer. Files that are deleted when they're no longer used. And of course, under certain circumstances, we know that deleted files might be recovered. And therein lies the risk. If the computer owner is so motivated, and technically capable, he could go groveling around on the hard disk of the computer you'd just been using to see what you'd left behind. And that's without the concern that perhaps the computer has spyware installed on it. So I'm assuming you trust the owner of this computer not to do something like that. If you want to be really, really safe, when returning the computer, you need to do a couple of things. One, clear everything in the browser. The cache, the cookies, whatever. Use the browser itself, use CCleaner, whatever makes sense to you. Then, run a free space wiper. Again, CCleaner has one of those. Now, naturally, like I said, it depends on how much you trust the person who's loaning you their computer. And of course, it also is a function of the sensitivity of whatever you actually used it for. But in general, as long as you remember to sign out, you're relatively safe. And if relatively isn't really good enough, well, then you need to start looking at things like clearing the browsers and clearing the free space. And if that doesn't even sound good enough, well, then maybe it's best you not be borrowing somebody else's laptop. Leo, I'm still on dial-up, and I'm quite happy with it for all that I do on the net or with email. However, I recently bought a new desktop for my wife, and this one comes with Windows 8.1 in 64-bit. So most of the programs we used with Windows XP, 32-bit, do not work anymore with the 64-bit version of Windows 8.1. My wife mostly needs Microsoft Word and Excel, which is incorporated into the Windows Works program, which we are willing to buy. However, this program is about 800 megabytes large, and to download it on dial-up would take about a week. The computer store told us that Microsoft would be selling this program on a CD, and they gave us a telephone number to call. We called Microsoft, and they're telling us that they do not have a CD for this program. Now, what's someone living in the sticks with only dial-up supposed to do? The store would not do the downloading and put it on a CD either. I never thought about the possibilities of 32-bit versus 64-bit when I bought the PC. Would you have any idea how to get around all of this? So I want to be clear about a couple of things. There's a little bit of confusion in the question, and I want to clear up much of it. First of all, I think that the problem has nothing to do with 32 versus 64-bit. Most 32-bit programs actually run just fine in 64-bit Windows. I use many 32-bit programs myself on my 64-bit installation of Windows 8.1. Like I said, I really don't think that there's a problem there. The problem really might be some confusion around the program called Works. Microsoft actually stopped making Microsoft Works some years ago. It's just no longer available, and that's probably why the Microsoft person said that they couldn't get it for you. There's certainly no 64-bit version of it, although you wouldn't need it. Like I said, the 32-bit version would be fine. If you still have your original installation disks for Microsoft Works, it might very well just work to install it on the new system. It might not, but it's worth a try. And as I said, the fact that it would be a 32-bit version doesn't mean that it won't work. It still absolutely could. Now, the clarification I need to make here is that Word and Excel were never part of Microsoft Works. Yes, Works had a spreadsheet and it had a word processor, but they were not called Word or Excel. Word and Excel are separate programs that are part of the Microsoft Office suite of programs. Works was a single program that had a spreadsheet and a word processor. Office is a collection of separate programs. Now, about dial-up. Yeah, it's frustrating for many reasons, but I did recently find out something that might just help. Current versions of Microsoft Word and Excel, or Microsoft Office for that matter, 2013, is available only as a download. And yeah, I wouldn't even begin to try that on dial-up. However, There is a mechanism to purchase what Microsoft calls backup DVDs of the application. Apparently, after you purchase the online copy, you can then order those DVDs from your Office account page. Now, to be clear, this doesn't work for Office 365, which is an online-only offering. This is specifically for the current version of Office, Office 2013. The other option I'm aware of would be to look for older versions of Office that still come on DVD. For example, Office 2010 should be fine. And like I've said now a couple of times, the 32-bit version of it actually should be fine. Although I think if you get a boxed product, both 32 and 64-bit versions are included. And finally, of course, you can also look for Microsoft Works as well, probably on eBay. But remember that it's a separate product. Word and Excel are not Microsoft Works. Word and Excel are Microsoft Office, which is a separate deal. Hey Leo, I recently changed my wireless router to that of my ISP's provided router. Is this recommended with respect to privacy and monitoring issues? I can go online and see which devices are connected to my router, and I can change certain settings like the password and the SSID. But I cannot take all the security measures you describe, like disabling logging and remote management. Can they monitor my internet activities easier now? What if I use a VPN? Or should I just buy my own router? Does it matter? The short answer is that it doesn't really matter, and that I recommend using your ISP's provided equipment unless you come across some compelling reason not to, and I don't see one here. The biggest reason is that using your ISP's provided equipment, then they're the ones responsible for supporting it. Or better yet, they can support it when you have questions about it. They should be able to. Logging isn't a huge issue, and remote management might well be required for the ISP to be able to support you. One of the things that I think is important to realize here is that ultimately your ISP can monitor pretty much anything you do. They're in charge of the bits that cross the internet to and from your connection, regardless of how you're connected. And this isn't really anything new. Using their equipment doesn't really make it substantially easier. Replacing it with your own doesn't make it substantially more difficult. Your ISP can see what websites you go to. They can see the contents of the unencrypted web pages you see. Now, they can't see the contents of your HTTPS connections, but they can at least see that you made them and to whom. But as I keep saying, you and I, we're just not that interesting. Our ISPs have way better things to do than to pay attention and watch what we're doing. Even recording what we're doing just isn't that exciting. I mean, why would they? Now, if you subscribe to the current NSA-style paranoia, well then, no ISP and no router would be safe from prying eyes. But again, I honestly believe that most people have an overinflated sense of importance, I guess to call it, when it comes to spying eyes. Now, of course, there are people with very real and very legitimate issues. People who are interesting, to use my terminology. And yeah, those people need to take some steps. So, if you believe you are one of those quote-unquote interesting people, well, things get difficult depending on just how paranoid you are. And to be honest here, I don't mean paranoid in a derogatory way. People who have legitimate reasons to be concerned absolutely should be paranoid. Now, yes, you can use a VPN, and in fact, that's a pretty reasonable solution for a number of situations. But if you don't trust your ISP, why would you trust the provider of a VPN service? You can take that kind of thinking to an extreme very, very quickly. So, as I said, I recommend that for most folks, just use the equipment that your ISP provides, unless you have some known, specific, compelling reason not to. I'd like to reinstall Windows XP on one PC and Windows 7 on another. Both have become very slow, and I've done almost everything you've written about to speed them up. I have the original disks for them. However, what I don't have are the disks for much of the software. And I read your articles on that, so I'll be getting disks in the future. So, how can I reinstall Windows, as well as the software on the PCs? On the XP PC, I really only want to keep Office 2007. On the Windows 7 PC, however, I have the disk for Office 2007 Pro, but not for several software packages that I bought and downloaded. One in particular was actually expensive, Dragon Naturally Speaking. I installed Macrium as you suggested. I wasn't sure from your articles if I could somehow use the backup from Macrium to reinstall just the software. I found some freeware that allowed me to obtain the keys to some of the Microsoft software on the PCs, but no other legitimate third-party software. Mainly, I want to keep Nitro PDF Pro, Wondershare Video Converter, and Dragon Naturally Speaking. Everything else I can probably live without, even if I bought it. The very short answer to your dilemma is that, strictly speaking, you can't do what you're trying to do. I'll review how to prevent that in the future at least, and throw out a couple of ideas or straws you can grasp at. Prevention boils down to actually a very simple rule. Save what you buy. If you buy disks, then save those somewhere safe. If your disks use activation codes, make sure that those codes are saved somewhere, somehow. I personally use a spreadsheet that I keep in a TrueCrypt vault, which is backed up daily. Now, this is where most people trip up. If you're purchasing downloaded software, save the download. Copy it somewhere and make sure that that gets backed up as well, wherever things get backed up. The same is true for the email that contains things like your registration code and proof of purchase. This is all stuff that you've purchased, stuff that you need to save should you ever need to reinstall the software again, as you're finding out. The rule is really, really simple. If you buy it, save it, and if you save it, back it up. Now, for some of the products you mentioned, it might be possible to go back to the original vendor's website and download the version that you have, even if it's an older version. This will work well if you've saved or recovered any activation code that might be required. In particular, Dragon Naturally Speaking, I would have you contact their customer support people to see if perhaps they have a record of your original purchase and can point you at a download of that same version. Definitely review your email history to find out if you have the actual original purchase information. Sometimes even those old download links will still work. Sometimes it'll just give you important information like the original product key that'll let you get further. Like I said, you could try contacting the vendor, particularly if you haven't changed email addresses in the interim. Sometimes, if they can look you up in their records, they may be willing to resend you your original purchase. Now, there's one other straw I at least want to mention. There are utilities like LapLink's PC Mover that claim to be able to move an installed application from one PC to another. They're not free, and I'm unclear how reliable that they are. I'm also unclear on whether they'll work in a reinstall situation like this, but they're worth investigating. The bottom line, though, is to keep those downloads in the future and those registration keys. You just never know when you might need them. A while ago, you gave some very helpful information on how to create a local account on my Windows 8.1 laptop. I followed this advice because I don't want my documents to be stored on SkyDrive except when I want them to be. I did this with a Windows 7 netbook using Boxcryptor to encrypt stuff held on SkyDrive. This worked really well. It allowed me to store stuff on the netbook or SkyDrive as I decided. My problem is, with Win 8.1, I'm really missing Minesweeper, but I can't find a trustworthy download to play on my PC except as a Windows app. All the downloads I've tried seem to end up with potentially unwanted programs which Malwarebytes warns me about. In desperation, I started to install the Win 8.1 app, but was asked to sign into my Microsoft account. This then told me that any documents I create will be stored on SkyDrive, which I don't want, so I canceled the process. I want to decide if I put stuff on SkyDrive or on my local computer. The impression I get is that by signing into my Microsoft account, I'm abandoning my local account. Is that correct? Can I sign into the Microsoft account but then log out and back into my local machine account easily or as easily as with Windows 7? If this is possible, what's the procedure? I find Windows 8.1 really confusing and just can't see how to do it. There are actually two scenarios here that I think are getting confused a little bit. And absolutely, Microsoft has done a wonderful job of making things confusing. Let's see if we can clear some of this up. Signing into your Microsoft account to access something like the Microsoft Store is unrelated to using your Microsoft account to log into your own machine. These are two different things. When you use your Microsoft account as your machine login account, then yes, you've switched away from using your old local machine account. Things like SkyDrive get a little easier, and I'm sure that there are other benefits of doing so, but you don't need to. I don't, and you certainly don't have to. I log into my machine using the same old local account that I've used for years, in fact on all of my versions of Windows that I've used. When you use your Microsoft account to sign in for something like the Microsoft Store, you're really just using it to sign into an online service. It doesn't change your machine login because it's unrelated to your machine login. It's kind of like logging into Hotmail or Outlook.com. Both of those use your Microsoft account, and doing so doesn't change how you log into your machine. SkyDrive, or soon to be called OneDrive, adds another layer of confusion. Regardless of how you get it, SkyDrive is not removing any choices. If anything, it's only adding choices. You don't have to store documents in SkyDrive. You can, but you don't have to. You may need to pay attention to where you save. The default might become SkyDrive, for example, but you can always save to your local machine and otherwise ignore SkyDrive. And once again, that's exactly what I do. SkyDrive support is integrated into a lot of Microsoft software these days, and that's nice if you like to use SkyDrive. But it's only as a choice, not as a requirement. One thing that I've discovered recently about Windows 8.1 and SkyDrive that may still make your scenario less than what you want it to be is this. If you log into your machine using your local machine account, which, to be honest, is what I recommend and probably what you really want, you can't install the old SkyDrive synchronization app. So what that means is your Boxcryptor scenario, where you're putting things into a folder on your machine and Boxcryptor is encrypting them before they get uploaded to SkyDrive, that scenario isn't going to work anymore. If you want to do that kind of thing, I recommend you use a different online storage service, like, say, Dropbox. But that's the only thing that's going to break here in 8.1. Where you save documents when you run applications is still a choice that you'll be able to make. But this ability to run Boxcryptor into SkyDrive with Windows 8.1, to the best of my knowledge, isn't going to work. So, my advice: keep your local machine account to log into your machine, sign into the Microsoft Store, get your game, and just watch whenever you hit save on a document. Your Windows login isn't going to change. Dear Leo, all of my legal forms are made with a program called Perform. Unfortunately, the company closed a long time ago, so there are no updates, and it works only in Windows XP. Now, I'm now on Windows 8.1, so I use VMware to run XP SP3 in a virtual machine, and Perform is the only program that I run in it. There is no network connection between the virtual machine and the host system. My question: since I do not need to connect to the internet in the virtual machine, if I uninstall IE from it, will I be immune to any malware? For the virtual machine, of course. Also, uninstalling IE, is that the only thing needed to isolate XP from the internet? Unfortunately, there are a number of issues with what you're proposing. Not that any of them are wrong per se, I just don't think you'll end up as secure as you think you might be. For example, there's no way I'd ever say you'd be able to make that XP virtual machine immune from malware. Running XP in a virtual machine is indeed one of my recommendations for those who are required to use XP for otherwise unsupported legacy software, exactly like you are. So far, so good, but there remain issues. First, IE can't be uninstalled. Now, you might make the icon disappear, but the guts of IE, the guts of Internet Explorer, are actually shared components within Windows itself. So, so-called uninstalling IE actually does very, very little. The most important is that it really doesn't improve your security all that much. Those shared components are used by other applications within Windows. However, let's say you somehow manage to uninstall IE. Your machine would likely still connect to the Internet. The virtual machine has some kind of virtual network adapter that's probably acting like a real network connection to your local network. And from there on, it can connect out to the Internet. For example, utilities like Windows Update that have nothing to do with Internet Explorer, they'll probably still reach out to the Internet even if IE weren't there. Internet connectivity is really kind of built into the operating system and the applications that run on it. Now, there is one possibility. As I said, the virtual machine has a virtual network adapter. Now, you could disable that. That would remove the virtual machine from your network. However, I'm guessing you probably have to transfer data between the virtual machine and its host. Or perhaps you print things. Whichever it might be, those things are typically implemented using, you guessed it, networking. So turning off the network adapter within the virtual machine might break your ability to easily copy data to and from the virtual machine or print from it. Now you might think that perhaps using a USB drive might be the way to go. Copy the data to the USB drive on the host machine and then switch the virtual machine connection so that it's connected to the USB drive and then copy the data off. Unfortunately, you've still broken your protection. Malware can indeed travel via USB drives. So unless you expect to never, ever transfer data to and from that virtual machine and never, ever plan to print from within that virtual machine, most of what you described won't help. And the things that would help would prevent your virtual machine from actually being useful. My recommendation? Well, do as little with that virtual machine as possible, of course. And it sounds like you're already doing that, focusing only on your Perform application. However, do make sure that it's running anti-malware tools and that they're up to date and running, and that the Windows XP firewall is also turned on. Uninstall IE if you like, and anything else for that matter. But please don't think that that's buying you any significant additional security. I do the Ask Leo Answercast every week. So if you have a question about your computer, the internet, or technology, head out to AskLeo.com to search for the answer or to ask your question. You might hear it answered here on a future Answercast. I also put out a newsletter every week. The Ask Leo newsletter includes answers and fixes and safety tips and opinions and even the occasional rant or answer as to why things are the way they are. Please back up. I plug this every week here because it's so critically important. Nothing can save you from almost any disaster like a proper and recent backup, and I can't tell you the number of times that people have lost critical or important or just really, really personally important data simply because they didn't have it backed up. Please realize that all of my answers are based on my own personal experience and should be used entirely at your own risk. I just don't know you, or your abilities, or the specifics of your machine, and those kinds of details can make a huge, huge difference. The Ask Leo Answercast is a production of Ask Leo and is copyright 2014. Thanks for listening. I'm Leo Notenboom, and I'll be back soon with another Ask Leo Answercast.